North Korea, a country shrouded in mystery. It remains very closed off to the rest of the world, which intrigues but also alarms many. Although discreet, Kim Jong Un, the supreme leader, has attracted a lot of attention in recent years. His military arsenal continues to grow, and his nuclear tests are becoming more frequent. As he becomes increasingly formidable, he threatens his neighbors, who are beginning to feel fear. But is North Korea really a danger? Where does its nuclear arsenal currently stand? That's what we propose to explore today, by briefly reviewing the country's history and politics, the major developments of its arsenal, and the current military situation. It's important to know that the two Koreas have rarely been unified. It all began in the 4th century BC when the Kingdom of Korea was founded. It remained that way for 200 years before wars ensued, particularly with China, the Mongols, and Japan. The country was often divided into 2, 3, or even 4 Koreas. This continued until the 15th century when the Joseon dynasty brought stability to the people of the peninsula, who had always maintained a common culture and language despite the separations. This lasted a little over 500 years. Then, in 1910, Korea officially fell under the domination of the Japanese Empire until the end of World War II. The official end of hostilities occurred on September 2, 1945, with Japan's surrender. At that time, the Korean peninsula was divided along the 38th parallel into 2 occupation zones, with Stalin and the Soviets in the north and Roosevelt and the Americans in the south. This division was initially intended as a temporary measure while a unified Korean government was established. However, the Cold War quickly arrived. Tensions only increased between the two superpowers. In 1947, the UN attempted to organize joint elections, but the northern part of Korea boycotted the vote in protest. The North Korean leaders feared that unified elections would lead to the establishment of a pro-American government across the peninsula. They preferred to maintain the division and promote their own interests. It's important to note that the tense political context of the post-war period and the ideological rivalries between the United States and the Soviet Union greatly influenced events in Korea. However, the South participated in the elections, chose its leaders, and declared independence, becoming the Republic of Korea in 1948. Following this, the North became the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. However, tensions escalated until the end of the Korean War, which lasted from 1950 to 1953. It also served as a perfect illustration of the extreme tension between the Soviet Union and the United States. The conflict began when North Korean troops invaded the South at the request of dictator Kim Il-sung. His goal was to reunify Korea by force. In response, the UN Security Council authorized a contingent to intervene, involving 22 countries. In total, at least 3 million civilians and military personnel were killed on both sides of the front. At the time of the armistice, a new border, closely resembling the previous one, emerged. The two countries were separated by a demilitarized zone, stretching 248 kilometers long and 4 kilometers wide. It extends from the waters of the Yellow Sea in the south to the Gulf of Korea, west of the peninsula, and is surrounded by bunkers, watchtowers, and electrified barbed wire. It is permanently guarded by nearly 700,000 North Korean soldiers and 410,000 South Korean soldiers, who are supported by American soldiers. Along this border, there are reportedly no fewer than 1 million mines. Today, the North is ruled by dictator Kim Jong Un, who holds the country with an iron fist under a communist and authoritarian model that isolates its population from the rest of the world. As for the South, it has become the 10th largest economy in the world, governed by a presidential regime. Thus, we have 2 Koreas and 2 different versions of the world. Although the armistice was signed 70 years ago, the coexistence remains fragile. Now let's take a look at North Korea's policy, which is quite peculiar. North Korea is one of the most isolated countries on the planet. Censorship is omnipresent, and state media tightly controls what the population sees and hears. 3 aspects of its political regime are important: its one-party system, its dictator with absolute power, and its dynastic succession. The first point, the one-party system, is characteristic of most former socialist states. The ruling party is at the top of the political structure and controls the legislative, administrative, and judicial powers. But it also controls social organizations and the life of the people. Moreover, the politics are characterized by the absolute power of one man, currently Kim Jong Un, which is a central element in autocratic dictatorships. Thus, while the powers of the state belong to the party, the power within the party belongs exclusively to one man. Finally, a unique element of the country is that it has a Stalinistic regime with a successful dynastic succession. The heir succeeds his father as the supreme leader simply because he has inherited his father's thoughts, skills, and talents. Thus, 3 generations have succeeded one another. Kim Il-sung, the country's first leader, began preparations for his succession as early as the 1970s. He later declared about his son, "Comrade Kim Jong-il is now capable of fulfilling all the duties of a leader." Thus, upon his death, his son was first appointed General Secretary of the Workers' Party of Korea. He then took on the role of chairman of the National Defense Commission. The same happened in 2011 when Kim Jong Un, the grandson of Kim Il-sung, took power. He is known for having strengthened their cult of personality, but also for his fierce repressive policy towards his opponents. But how did they come to power? In fact, it was Joseph Stalin who placed Kim Il-sung at the head of North Korea, having been hailed as a hero of the resistance. Considered the father of the North Korean nation, he developed heavy industry and relied on the working class to impose his dictatorship. He was the one who invaded South Korea and thus initiated the Korean War. After the war, he remained in power and turned the Communist Party into a giant machine serving only him. A relatively prosperous socialist economy emerged. However, in the early 1990s, the collapse of the Soviet Union greatly affected the country, which relied on importing Russian energy. Shortly thereafter, Kim Il-sung died, and Kim Jong-il was designated to replace him. In addition to the economic crisis, the country was also hit by a series of climate-related disasters, leading to a severe famine. For example, in the 1990s, a famine outbreak known as the Arduous March claimed over 1 million lives. A market economy was then created. Thus, while husbands continued to work in factories, Korean women could support their families by importing goods from China. Then, in 2011, upon his death, Kim Jong-un, his youngest son, took power. He was ambitious and wanted to modernize his country and open it up to new technologies. He is also known for being a ruthless tyrant, obsessed with his nuclear and ballistic programs, which he prioritizes over his population. Indeed, North Korea is subject to multiple international sanctions due to its nuclear and ballistic programs and suffers from chronic food shortages. Currently, 18 million people, nearly 70% of the population, depend on food distributions from the regime, which sources them from the country's collective farms. These farms are subject to a quota policy aimed at rationing the entire agricultural production. However, the distributed rations are not sufficiently varied to provide a complete and balanced nutritional intake. The latest UN report states that nearly 40% of children suffer from malnutrition. Moreover, the country was one of the first states to close its borders when the COVID-19 pandemic began. The country's economy, primarily based on agriculture and trade with China, has been heavily impacted by this health crisis. Yet, on national television, North Koreans see a man with a radically opposite image. The goal for them is to support their leader. Since the country's creation, propaganda policies have been implemented to prop up the leader's image. It is characterized by promoting a strong and charismatic leadership image, combined with a carefully controlled staging of the leader's public life. Thus, the dictator's military skills and involvement in the country's economic development are highlighted. North Koreans then have a biased image of a godlike leader who is close to his people and loved by all. However, this figure of a charismatic and vigorous dictator would be far from reality. Indeed, rumors about Kim Jong-un's health have been multiplying for several months. Absent for several weeks, some wonder if his health is weaker than he would like to admit, especially since the dictator's family has been known to suffer from severe heart diseases and diabetes. Now that you know a bit more about North Korea's history, let's focus on its military. In a very short time, the country has managed to develop militarily. Today, Kim Jong-un possesses nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles capable of reaching American territory. This military strength deters the United States and other global powers from any attack against the country. a true boon for the dictator. But let's take a closer look. It is true that the country has experienced some failures. For example, on May 31st, 2023, North Korea failed in the launch of its first spy satellite. But after a second failure in November 2023, the country successfully placed its first spy satellite in orbit. According to experts, this achievement would optimize North Korea's intelligence gathering capabilities, particularly concerning its southern rival. It could thus obtain crucial data in the event of a military conflict. Moreover, the regime has since claimed that it possesses images of key American and South Korean military sites, though it is yet to show these images. This illustrates the rapid advancements of the dictatorship. According to a report from the Defense Intelligence Agency, Jong Un and his armed forces are a serious threat to the security of the United States and its allies. But what exactly makes the North Korean armed forces so dangerous in the eyes of Americans and their allies? Although it is one of the poorest countries in the world, North Korea devotes more than 15% of its GDP to its military. Thus, North Korea boasts the fourth largest army in the world by active personnel, with 1.2 million active military personnel and more than 500,000 reservists. It also ranks first in the number of military personnel per 1,000 inhabitants, with a figure of 49.03. It is equipped with 6 branches: the ground forces, the Navy, the Air Force, the Strategic Forces, the Special Operations Forces, and the Workers' and Peasants' Red Guards. Named the Korean People's Army, it was established in 1948. Although the country is very closed, some soldiers integrated into 2 anti-aircraft artillery battalions, and about 200 pilots participated in the Vietnam War. However, the participation of these soldiers was only highlighted more than 20 years after the events. Logistical support was also provided. Additionally, about 30 North Korean pilots participated in the Yom Kippur War on the side of the Arab forces. Today, it is notably mobilized on the Korean Demilitarized Zone. In terms of composition of the North Korean army, it includes infantry weapons such as Type 98 assault rifles, 3,800 battle tanks, and 2,800 armored vehicles, mainly Russian BTR series and Chinese Type M1973. It also has thousands of pieces of heavy artillery, multiple rocket launchers, and anti-aircraft guns. As for its navy, it is composed of many small units, with its main weapon being a fleet of submarines estimated at over 70 units, including 10 pocket submarines for special operations. In September 2023, it was revealed that Pyongyang had constructed a tactical nuclear attack submarine. Jong Un specified that this submersible will accomplish its combat mission and will be one of the main offensive means of the national naval forces. North Korea also plans to transform its existing submarines into combat vessels equipped with nuclear weapons. When it comes to the equipment of the North Korean Air Force, it's different, because a large part of it is old, poorly maintained, and completely obsolete. This is due to the air supremacy of the United States and the lack of accessible new technologies, making the development of North Korea's air forces almost impossible. For this reason, the majority of the military budget goes to the ground forces, the Navy, and ballistic nuclear research. However, to cite some figures, the country is believed to have around 800 bombers such as the H-5 and Ilyushin IL-28 types, 540 fighters, 120 attack helicopters, and 300 transport cargo planes. Additionally, North Korea is also present in the field of drones. Indeed, the North Korean military drone program dates back to the late 1980s, when the regime first imported devices from China. Since then, a series of surveillance and attack drones have been developed, partly inspired by Russian and American aircraft technology imported from the Middle East. More effective than previously thought, in December 2022, several autonomous devices infiltrated South Korea. 4 of them reached an island near the border, and a 5th flew over Seoul. It's quite incredible, especially since the South Korean military launched helicopters and jet planes to shoot them down, but failed. A few months later, in April 2023, it was revealed that the Asian country had tested a new type of submarine drone that was capable of carrying a nuclear warhead, called Haeil-2 Unmanned Underwater Nuclear Attack Boat. It navigated off the east coast of the country for over 71 hours before its test warhead exploded underwater. It would thus be capable of carrying a nuclear warhead capable of creating a radioactive tsunami. However, according to some experts, the dictator may have exaggerated its capabilities. Among the other branches of this army, we have the North Korean Special Forces. But what are they? Well, they're used for infiltration and sabotage missions abroad. For example, in 1968, an attack on the Blue House in Seoul occurred. The Blue House is the official residence and office of the president, and the attack resulted in 28 North Korean deaths, 68 South Korean deaths, and 3 American deaths. It should also be noted that the country is known for its cyber warfare capabilities. Constantly progressing, its hackers use increasingly sophisticated tools to target governments, media, financial institutions, and private institutions worldwide. Thus, its hackers train in elite North Korean technology schools and even attend the best science and engineering schools in China to access cutting-edge technologies not available in North Korea. Especially in recent years, it has demonstrated its ability to destroy critical infrastructure systems and infiltrate military, government, and intelligence networks. For example, the WannaCry ransomware attack. It occurred in 2017 and is one of the largest ransomware attacks in history. It affected computer systems worldwide, particularly affecting certain Windows systems, but also compromising aviation, railway, and healthcare networks in the United States, Asia, and Europe. Moreover, more and more experts believe that the country's cyber warfare capabilities now pose a more immediate threat than its military programs. In 2024, the ruling party announced the launch of 3 new spy satellites, the construction of drones, and the development of electronic warfare capabilities. But what about its nuclear arsenal? Is it really that dangerous? And should we take it so seriously? North Korea conducted its first atomic test in 2006, and its 6th and last to date was in 2017. 18 years after the first test in 2024, it possesses over 40 nuclear warheads, and this number is expected to continue to increase in the coming years. Indeed, the regime considers its nuclear program essential for its survival. Thus, in 2023, North Korea enshrined its status as a nuclear power in its constitution. Moreover, the dictator declared that his country would not hesitate to retaliate with nuclear weapons if it was provoked by nuclear weapons. He also ordered the expansion of North Korea's nuclear arsenal and the development of an intercontinental ballistic missile. This new missile should be able to strike directly at American territory, the dictator's sworn enemy. Thus, shortly thereafter, on December 18, 2023, it was revealed that an intercontinental ballistic missile, aka ICBM, named Hwasong-18, was launched. It traveled just over 1,000 kilometers horizontally and reached a maximum altitude of about 6,000 kilometers. Around 9:37 a.m. Japanese time, the missile fell into the sea outside of Japan's exclusive economic zone. This launch occurred just a few hours after the launch of a short-range missile. This ICBM is believed to have a range of over 15,000 kilometers, allowing it to strike the entire American territory. According to the South Korean Army, it uses solid fuel, making missile transportation easier and allowing for faster launches than liquid fuel versions. This was the 3rd launch of this type by Pyongyang, following launches in April and July, and overall the 5th launch of the year by Pyongyang. Thus, 2023 marks the year North Korea conducted a record number of missile tests. According to some experts, the dictator's show of force, in addition to trying to intimidate his enemies, is an attempt to divert the population's discontent over the country's economic problems. In response, Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, in addition to condemning the launches, warned Pyongyang that any nuclear attack against the United States or its allies would result in the end of Kim Jong Un's regime. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also added that North Korea posed a threat to peace and stability in the region. Moreover, the Allies have strengthened their defense cooperation and activated a real-time data sharing system on North Korean missile launches and the armed forces of the 3 allied countries. In a deterrence effort, the U.S. military also sent the nuclear-powered submarine USS Missouri, the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan, and a B-52 strategic bomber to South Korea, because tensions between the 2 Koreas have never been higher, especially since the Korean War. The neighboring countries have still technically been at war since 1953, with the fighting having been halted by an armistice, not a peace treaty. In early 2024, North Korea's parliament approved the dissolution of agencies working for the reunification with the southern border. Yet in 2018, the two Koreas began a rapprochement process, characterized by 3 meetings between Kim Jong Un and the then South Korean president Moon Jae-in. This was during the Winter Olympics and was dubbed the Peace Olympics. The North Korean leader also threatened Seoul with war for any violation even by 0.001 millimeter of its territory. Moreover, he emphasized that his country would not recognize the de facto maritime border between the two countries, the Northern Limit Line, and called for constitutional changes allowing Pyongyang to occupy South Korea in the event of war. It should be noted that in their respective constitutions, both South and North Korea claim sovereignty over the entire Korean peninsula. Furthermore, the year 2024 promises to be tense as the dictator has issued new threats of nuclear strikes against South Korea, and has also ordered the acceleration of military preparations for a war that could break out at any time on the peninsula, according to his statements. Moreover, on January 5, 2024, North Korea fired 192 shells into the Yellow Sea, forcing Seoul to shelter the inhabitants of 2 islands. This was the most significant escalation on the peninsula since the North Korean military bombed Yongpyong in 2010 in response to a South Korean live fire exercise near the border. It resulted in 4 deaths, 2 soldiers and 2 civilians. At the same time as the Hwasong-18 ICBM, it was reported that a new reactor appeared to have become operational. According to the International Atomic Energy Agency, it would be located 100 kilometers north of Pyongyang at the Yongbyon complex, which already houses the country's first nuclear reactor with a capacity of 5 megawatts. However, for the agency, which cannot visit the site because its inspectors were expelled in 2009, it is impossible to confirm its operational status with precision. It must therefore rely on monitoring nuclear developments in the country using satellite images. In addition to missile launches aimed at developing the country's ballistic capability and improving its nuclear power plants, North Korea is strengthening its relations with other countries. As Antoine Bondas, a researcher at the Foundation for Strategic Research, explains to Le Figaro, the population is hermit, not the regime. North Korea has a diplomatic network of 5 continents. Some relationships are symbolic, like with certain Latin American countries, but others rely on intense cooperation. Currently, it has diplomatic ties with 162 countries. Indeed, over 80% of states recognize having diplomatic relations with North Korea. It also has 47 embassies on every continent, and 84 countries have embassies in Pyongyang or representations at the Consulate General in Chongjin, in the north of the peninsula. For the record, during the Cold War, North Korea only had diplomatic ties with the communist bloc. Moreover, today most of the relationships are still based on its traditional allies, Russia, China, and brother countries in Southeast Asia like Vietnam. From the 1990s onward, the regime's diplomacy took a new turn. Indeed, as the country was experiencing a major famine, Pyongyang opened its borders to humanitarian organizations and sent a representative to the UN for the first time. At the same time, the communist bloc was collapsing. It was finally possible for a third country to maintain ties with both Koreas. Seoul then began its Sunshine Policy. Its goal was to allow North Korea to open up to the world in hopes that it would normalize. Unfortunately, as we see today, this strategy has proven to be absolutely unfruitful. North Korea's most faithful ally is China, which has stood by Pyongyang since the Korean War. Indeed, in 1961, a Sino-North Korean treaty was signed, providing China's support in the event of a military attack against North Korea. For TV5 Monde, Antoine Bondas, a French researcher at the Foundation for Strategic Research, explains, "We are in a situation where North Korea's strategic value in the eyes of Beijing continues to grow due to Sino-American tensions, but also those in the Taiwan Strait." He adds that China's goal is to create another tension zone to force Americans to focus on multiple areas. Moreover, this relationship is crucial for North Korea because about 90% of the country's trade is with China. But recently, it has found a new ally. Indeed, North Korea has grown closer to Moscow. This cooperation is not new. Russia quickly acquired North Korean ammunition to support its large-scale offensive against Ukraine. But it has taken a new turn. Kim Jong Un even traveled to Russia. During this 6-day official visit, he met Vladimir Putin and Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu. Upon his return, the local Russian administration offered him several kamikaze drones, an autonomous surveillance device Garin 25, as well as a bulletproof vest for offensive operations. Subsequently, South Korean intelligence services estimated that Pyongyang received decisive technological assistance from Russia, notably for placing their satellite into orbit. It was even made public that Moscow would help the country build its own satellites as well as nuclear-powered submarines. In exchange, Kim Jong Un will supply thousands of shells and missiles to the Russian army to facilitate its war in Ukraine. Finally, Moscow and Pyongyang could also conduct joint military exercises in the Pacific Ocean and strengthen ties between their armies. The two countries seem to have found the ideal agreement, because on one side, Moscow desperately needs weapons, particularly ammunition and artillery bombs. Pyongyang has excess of both. On the other side, North Korea is impoverished by sanctions, so it needs both weapons and money. It should also not be forgotten that after 3 years of closed borders and failed negotiations with the United States, the country finds itself more isolated than ever. However, so far, no agreement has been publicly announced by the two leaders. But Kim Jong Un has shown particular interest in Russian space technology. Moreover, the dictator wants to be less dependent on China. The opportunity for a new alliance with Moscow could therefore help the country in its mission. As for Vladimir Putin, he declared that he wanted to help North Korea develop its space industry. Kim could also take this opportunity to ask the Kremlin for access to advanced weapons technology and knowledge to accelerate his nuclear program. And even though few people thought an agreement between these two nations would really take place, at the beginning of 2024 in Ukraine, it was learned that experts found missile debris launched by Russia that originated from North Korea. These were believed to be KN-23 ballistic missiles. As for France, along with Estonia, it is the only European country that has no official relations with North Korea. But cooperation does exist with the authoritarian regime. According to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, beyond the 8.2 million euros of trade established in 2016, the two countries conduct cultural, scientific, and technical cooperation programs. They serve to promote the French language and culture, particularly at Kim Il-sung University, and for Pyongyang to benefit from humanitarian aid. It is therefore clear that North Korea currently represents a real danger. In recent years, it has become increasingly powerful, investing heavily in its military arsenal. Even at the expense of its population, it constantly threatens its enemies. Although its nuclear tests have generated much attention, they are not only the area that worries the United States. The risks of cyber warfare, the enhancement of its submarines, and the advanced technology of its drones make the Korean dictatorship a serious threat. However, the dictator defends himself, explaining that it is necessary for his survival. Unable to reach agreements, the two Koreas have never been so far apart. As the year 2024 began, tensions were escalating with new ballistic tests by North Korea. But where will Kim Jong Un stop? Will a conflict soon erupt on the Korean peninsula? Stay tuned.